Good morning to each one. Welcome. Greetings in Jesus' name. I've been blessed to be here already, listening in on the Sunday school. I don't know if I have to share everything I was planning to share or not, but a lot of what was shared in the Sunday school I think fits in well with what God laid on my heart to share. So, the title of the message for today is Live Today. More God speaking to me, things that He's been working on in my life. So I'll invite you along on a journey that I've been on. One of the questions that I came across that at first I was like, did he really say, I was listening to a preacher and he asked, and when he said it, I was really, did you actually say that? And then I realized that I say that, or I don't say it, but I live that way sometimes. But there's a question to ponder. Have you felt like you needed to fix things because God's plan for your life is not working out? We say God knows everything. He knows more than what we do, and His plan's perfect, and yet I question it so often. But looking at the life of Joseph, to start with, I'm going to read through some of Genesis. I'll be jumping around verses quite a bit. Feel free to follow along or even listen along. So in Genesis, looking at Joseph's life, as a young boy, he was more of a maybe a prized son. His dad liked him more than, or favored him more than the other children. And, we say parents shouldn't have the favorite one, and yet every family always does, and it's never you. But, it's part of life, I guess. Joseph happened to be his, and he probably thought, no, he had it the worst off. And so God revealed dreams to him, and he was able to interpret them and foresee things through dreams. And, he had the dream of people, all his brothers bowing down to him, and even his parents. And I didn't think of or remember, but reading through Genesis, when that happened, when he even presented it to his dad said, or laughed at him, or approached him like, we would never bow down. This is so outrageous. And so, the rejection of something that he felt God had laid on his heart from his family. Then a while later, it doesn't say how long later, but at some point he went out to check on his brothers because they had been away taking care of the sheep. And as they saw him approaching, who knows where they were. If you study that culture, and different thing when I had studied about it, as the idea was given that at that time you would travel from town to town until you found them, not knowing where they were going to go. You kind of had an idea of where they were going to go. You might have had common places, but it wasn't that they could just send them a WhatsApp at night and say, hey, we made it to the next camp spot over here in wherever town they were at, and everything's going well. They had to go seek for them, to find them. And so he gets there. I don't know if he ever found out, but his brothers were scheming how they could kill him. After Joseph probably if he had a difficult time finding them, or, he was just checking up on his brothers as his father had asked him to. And his oldest brother convinced the others, said, no, we're just going to throw him in a pit until we can find something better to do with him. But his own family rejected him and left him to die almost, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing, whatever the plans were. And then they sold him into slavery to some random people coming across the way that they ran across. You might say that they just happened to be at the right place in the right time. Obviously, it was God's divine direction to bring those people along. And I couldn't find in the Bible. I was hoping I could, but storybooks always say that Joseph went away. He was quiet for a while, and then he was singing as he was traveling. And whether that's true or not, I think it fits in well with what I had to share, so I like the idea of it. But it doesn't say that he was necessarily singing, but going from the three major things in his life, his family completely rejecting him. He left his dad, and at that time, being sold into slavery, probably never figured that he'd see his parents again. Not knowing that when he left that day is probably the last time that he would see his parents. Jumping in, Genesis 39, I'm going to read a portion of this and then read verses 1 through 12 and then jump to verse 19. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him an overseer of his house and all that he had to put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and it came to pass after these things, his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you. Because you are his wife, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her and fled and ran outside. I'm going to skip the next couple of verses. It just talks about her deceiving the other people of that Joseph tried to initiate sleeping with her. Jumping in verse 19. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, "Your servant did to me after this manner," that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison and place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in his prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed his mercy, and he gave him favor in his sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Looking through there a little bit, it doesn't appear that Joseph got bitter. It doesn't appear that he got worried. He did the best that he could wherever he was. And it didn't matter what came across him. You could say everything that he did up to this point, none of it was his fault. Whether he had any influence on any of it or not, it wasn't his fault. And yet people, left him by the wayside, or threw him in jail, left him there to rot, or whatever you want to say. He kept on getting back up and doing his best wherever he was. One of the things I had to think about is if he would have been living in depression, living in whatever emotions, and just been thinking about all how this is all so bad, and and dwelling on that, I don't think God could have used him like he did. He had to get back up. He had to shake the dust off. He had to, you know, be present wherever he was at. He had to go back to doing what God had called him or what he felt God was leading him to. Um, and in his situation, the state of despair, family having completely sold him, I mean, literally sold him as a slave, and not knowing if he's going to see his parents again, people lying about him. He had everything you could ask for, you might say. He was over, doesn't make sense to me, but he was over this guy's entire property, and it sounds like the guy was really rich. And the guy didn't even know what he had because he left full control to Joseph. Joseph could have done whatever he wanted to and gotten away with it, you might say, and the guy would have never known. And then all of that was taken away because someone lied because he stood up for what was right. And then, the other thing I had to think about that is he was a slave at this time as well. What guy in his right mind, might you ask, would take a slave and put him over everything he has? And then even in the jail, he was put over the jail, and even the jailkeeper didn't even follow up with him because he just trusted him. The reputation that Joseph had left with people, I find it hard that he would have been living in self-doubt, self-pity, whatever you want to say, but getting back up and going on to the next thing. Keeping on going through his life a little bit. After some time, a baker and a butler got put into jail with him, and he interpreted their dreams as well. And Joseph asked the butler to, don't forget about me when you get back out. Remember what I did for you. And you might say the first thing that the guy did was forgot what he did. He left and went about his merry way. He got his position back and what he had been doing before he got thrown into jail, and completely forgot about him until all of a sudden there was another dream that he couldn't interpret. But he remembered that Joseph was able to interpret dreams, and so he told Pharaoh to go to Joseph. And I'm going to jump in Genesis 41, starting in verse 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, "Bow thy knee." So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. I didn't realize until I read this again, I might have, and I forgot, but Joseph was only 30 at this time. He went through all of this in 30 years. I used to think 30 was really old, but now it doesn't look as old anymore. But he got pulled out of jail, not even having served his time that he was supposed to serve and got put over everything that Pharaoh had, almost had more power than Pharaoh. Obviously, God was working in his life, and he didn't let what happened affect him in a negative way. He used it to grow, to get back up on his feet, and to keep going. Going to Genesis 42, starting in verse 25. I'm going to read it because we're in Genesis, and I'll probably come back to this a little bit later. And Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks. So the brothers came. There was a famine throughout all the land as God had revealed in the dream. And so they came to Pharaoh or to Egypt to get grain to be able to take back. And so this is jumping in there. Genesis 42, 25. Then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened the sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of the sack. So he said to his brother, "My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack." Then their hearts filled them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, "What is this that God has done to us?" I didn't catch it before either on that part of it as well, but he said he also gave them provisions for their journey. If there was a famine, a 7-year famine throughout the land, grain prices were, we all know how things work when there's shortages or whatever else. Whoever has the most money gets it almost. And so he just gave them their money back. He gave them extra after everything they had done to him. They obviously didn't know that he was their brother. But he wasn't bitter. I mean, he might have struggled with it, but he didn't express bitterness towards them. He went out of his way to bless them and to give them more. Jumping back to the title a little bit, Living Today. My wife will attest to this far too often, but I had to think about it and kind of where, as I was studying on this, I got home from work Friday, and we sat down for supper, and I was never there for supper. I physically ate, but I don't feel like I was there. I don't even remember. To my shame, I don't even remember if we talked about things or whatever else it was. My mind was already on Saturday and on Sunday morning, and what I'm going to do Sunday afternoon, and yet I never enjoyed that moment. The time to spend with family, with my daughter, with my wife, enjoying supper. So often, I know there is a happy medium. I'm going to focus on the opposite because I don't know. I haven't come across many people that have struggled with being too much in the moment, not planning out. So, especially for myself, I often miss the moment. The one thing I had to think of afterwards, I had gone to my desk and I was studying later that night again, and I just happened to think about it. We ate supper, but I don't really remember anything that happened. I was physically there, but my mind wasn't. Mentally, I wasn't. And I had to think, was what was on my mind or mentally why I wasn't present, was that worth missing the opportunity that I had? What are the reasons that we miss the moments that we're in? Are we happy? Are we present in the moment that we are? And to think of dogs. When you walk up to a dog, especially if it's one that you know or that knows you, they're all excited. That's all they can think about. They're not off searching for food. They're happy. Babies, when they're born, all they know is here and now. When they're hungry, and they're hungry now. When they need change now. But for some reason, as we get older, that gets further and further behind us. children start to recognize birthdays as a major milestone, and then that's all they can think about. You know, their fourth birthday or their fifth birthday or whatever the next one is so far away. It takes 5 years to get to the next birthday. And then it doesn't take long. All of a sudden, I'm not sure, I think I was in my teenage years and I was like, I could just go back and, if I was just in high school again, I don't have to work anymore. And you know, as we grow older, we want to go back. In 16, 18 years' time, we go from being present in the moment to wanting to go right back to there. Things seem so simple then. I know it's really easy to say, but if we would just focus on the moment and get the most out of it, we'd have a lot more joy or a lot more fulfillment in the things that we do. And it's extremely difficult to do, especially with the way God designed us to be. But thinking about as mankind has, I don't want to say evolved, but as mankind has advanced in technology in many different areas in life, we have done so many things that we should be able to go back in time. You know, we have done so much to speed things up to get our time back, and yet we're further behind than we've ever been before. They used not to have microwaves, and they invented microwaves so we could make food faster, so we could get to the next place faster. Whatever it is, vehicles keep going faster, and you have airplanes, you have trains, you have all these things that we do to make things go faster. And now we have AI, so we can get even more done. And yet we're still further behind than I think we've ever been, or at least that's how I find myself. The one thing that I find interesting is there's two things that God hasn't allowed man to discover, or that man hasn't discovered yet, is we haven't found the way to go back in time, and we have very limited abilities to go forward in the future. I suppose the airplane that goes faster than the speed of light can go in the future, but not for long. But the life expectancy of humans has been 70 years. That hasn't changed in many, many years. And yet we're doing all these things to save time in the 1 to 70 years that the average person lives. Came across a story, and I'm sure most of you heard it. I'll say it again just to bring it back to the front of our mind. But there was this man that had been on an island fishing, and he'd go out fishing every day, come home, relax the rest of the day. You might say that he was living in retirement, but he wasn't that old. And one day a tourist that happened to be visiting the island was talking with him and mentioned that, you're such a good fisherman, you should start up a charter company. All these tourists that come here, they'd pay you a lot of money. You could do a couple boats. You could do, all this thing. You make a big business for yourself. And the guy was like, that's a good thought. Said, if I do that for 20 years, what am I going to do when I'm done? You could retire and go fishing every day. Said, where am I at now? So often we miss the point of things because we're so focused on something bigger. The tourist, I don't know what happened to the tourist afterwards, but our mind automatically goes to doing something extravagant, something big, and yet sometimes the answer is so simple. Two Chinese proverbs that I think of: living in the past is depression, living in the future is worry. If you're living in peace, you're living in the present. Are we okay being here, being right where we're at? I think it is important to learn from the past, to learn from our mistakes, and I think we need to plan but too often we focus on maybe not planning as much, but worrying about what God is going to do for us in the future. Though another proverb that I came across, I had forgotten about it, but it said the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today or right now, whoever we're at. We might not be able to change the things in the past. So often you hear older people say, if I could just go back and undo that or just change that. And I think it's good that we learn from that, but we can't change it except for what we're doing today. One of the things that I think about is our five senses are things that we can't escape from. As far as if we smell something, it's hard to get the smell to go away. If we feel something, if we break our bones or break a finger, or if you stub your toe, it's hard to get the pain to go away immediately. And yet our mind can wander. Our mind can go from wherever we are. We could be sitting here in church, we could be sitting at a supper table, we could be on our way to work, and our mind could be 5 miles down the road at home, or it could still be back at work, or whatever big thing is going on in our life. And I think it's good that we focus, or we think about things, and yet we should also take time to enjoy the moments that we're in. I had going back to the thing about our supper Friday night, later I had to think about it is, I got to the supper table, but I never really showed up. I never made it to the supper table. I skipped that entire thing and kept on going to the next thing. So often we miss the blessings, the opportunities that we have right in front of us because we're so focused on something else. We're so focused on fixing the situation that God brought us into because our plan was better. And if God would have just listened to our plan, we'd be further along. And yet, I need to remind myself that God's plan is best. And sometimes we don't understand what He has. And it's not easy. It's extremely difficult to be okay with His plan, especially as a male or as a man of the house, to want to have everything figured out, everything penciled out, and from the time that we're born until we pass away, we want to have everything laid out. And yet, sometimes God, I'm wondering if He sits there and smiles sometimes at us when we do that. The other thing that I had to put it more into plain, simple illustration is you put your phone charger or your phone beside your charger, except for a wireless charger, it's not going to charge. Your phone's there, the power is there, but unless they're connected, it doesn't do anything. You can be present and yet miss the entire thing. If we're present when we have personal time with God, if we're truly present, He can bless us, He can speak to us. But if we're sitting there reading the Bible or maybe praying, are we also listening? I can somewhat multitask. I have a bad habit right now that I'm on the way home from work and I'll have my stereo playing music and I might have my earbuds in listening to a podcast or whatever else, and yet I'll get home and not remember a single song I heard or what the guy said on the podcast because my mind is still thinking about what I'm going to do when I get home. But are we that same way when we're spending time listening to God? Whatever we're in, whatever situation we're in, are we there? Are we part of that, and are we doing what God has called us to? A really challenging question that I had to ask myself is, could our purpose be as simple as being present in the moment? So often we think our God is a big God, and He's not going to just ask me to do something that simple, something so simple in life. I want to turn to, or look at Jehoshaphat's life a little bit. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. In 2 Chronicles 20, verses 15 and 25, I'm not going to take the time to read them. But right before this, it was in the Old Testament, battles were really common. That was how you settled things. That's how you fought. And, like was mentioned in Sunday school, there's no end to revenge. You can always try and go back and settle things. Well, you hit me harder than I did, so I get another round, or whatever it is. In Jehoshaphat's time, God had asked them to go to battle, and yet he had a really strange request for them. And so Jehoshaphat asked the entire nation that it was under to fast when they found out their enemies were close. And God spoke to Jehoshaphat and said, I want you guys, instead of take your swords, staves, everything with you, but instead of using those, sing as you walk to your battle. And from what I understood, Jehoshaphat was worried because of how many people were there, and that they were going to overtake them, overpower them because of how big of an army that they were facing. And then God comes to him and asks him to do something so silly. They're going to give away their position. They're going to let him know how big they are by singing. And so they did. They followed God's calling, and when they got there, there wasn't a person that was standing. Everybody was dead. They won the battle before they even got there. And God blessed them so much that it took them 3 days to gather all the spoils or the leftovers that people had on them. And I say simply because they followed God's call. They did what God asked them. They didn't try and pave their own way. They didn't try and overtake them. My guess is if they would have tried to fight with a sword and a battle like they had been typically, they probably wouldn't have won. God's blessing wouldn't have been on it. Yet they did the simple thing God asked them to do. They followed God's leading. Job 34:29. When he gives quietness, who then can make trouble? And when he hides his face, who then can see him? Whether it is against a nation or a man alone. And then Psalms 61, 1-4. Hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth I will cry to you. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in you, in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in your shelter of your wings. Selah. Just going back to, are we trying to fix the disaster or the plan that God has led us into? Is God a good enough God, or are we trying to make him someone he's not? He is not, so he fits our plans. Just, I guess, a challenge for each of us to live in the moment, to maybe be content with where God has placed us, understanding that sometimes it's simple. Sometimes he asks us to be a prayer warrior. Sometimes he asks us to do things that might not make sense to us, and yet we can enjoy the time that we have if we rely on him and get the most out of life. So that's all I have to share. Let's stand for a word of prayer. Father, thank you for the blessings you've given us, for being with us, for watching over us and always walking beside us. Be with us as we go from here. Help us that we would be content, be present in your plan, that we could follow you, your will in each step of our life. Just be with us as we go from here, that we would be lights for you wherever we go, and that people could see your work in us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. You're dismissed.